It is Thursday, August 17th, 2023, and you are listening or watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. I am your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem. Also work for Tapology. I've written for a lot of different MMA media websites, worked as a manager, longtime MMA fan overall. So happy you're joining me on today's podcast where I cover all things Asian MMA. I go over the weekend schedule of events, highlight various prospects, things to watch out for, and then after all that, take your questions. So we'll get to everything Asian MMA or any other kind of questions. You guys always have some good ones, every once in a while, some crazy ones, but hit me with whatever you got. But without further ado, guys, it is a busy time. These are crazy times. We got Zhang Weili fighting this weekend, defending her belt on her second title reign, and then next week, perhaps even crazier in the MMA, Asian MMA world, got Road to UFC semifinals. We've got UFC Singapore. That's a big one. I'll be hopefully releasing a video in the next couple days breaking down the whole card for UFC Singapore. Not often in the post-2020 world that we get a UFC fight event in Asia. So really excited for the Singapore event. A lot of great fights. A couple decent Asian MMA prospects, but even just some like pretty heavy-hitting UFC fights overall with some really good top fighters. So excited to get into that. If you have not subscribed to the channel, would really appreciate that. Have really enjoyed welcoming in a lot of new subscribers this last week as things are kind of ramping up to all of what I just mentioned. So, but if you're a long-time listener or this is your first time, would appreciate your subscription. Of course, that is always free. You know how YouTube works. But yeah, let's get into some Asian MMA. First up, we've got the Friday Fights show tomorrow morning from One Championship. And not interesting that they've put Mr. Agalan Thani on the Friday Fights events. It kind of felt like he had been around long enough to just kind of have a permanent place on like the Amazon Prime shows, but interesting that they have put him on that. He will be fighting Magomed Murad Kasayev, and then for him will be Chayan Orjak, who's Russian, Mongolian, both. You know, One Championship always throws up two flags whenever they have a fighter of an ethnicity that's but a resident of another country. So let me just pull up these. I haven't actually done a whole lot of looking into this week's card. So interested to see what it has for us, and I'll share my screen so you can take a look at it as well. Boy, I tell you, it is hot. This has been the hottest week of the year for us. And back in the day, they didn't build these apartments with AC because it never used to get this hot. But so yeah, we're struggling here. Okay, so One Friday Fights 29. It's got Agalan Thani versus Magomed Murad Kasayev, undefeated Russian guy, fights at middleweight, and then Chayan Orjak versus Andrei Chelbayev. So let's kind of hop into Agalan Thani. He's been around One Championship for a minute, 27 years old, so still fairly young. But you can see he has been around, gosh, he's fought every single fight of his 11-fight pro career with One Championship. That's why I was surprised to see him on one of the Friday Fight shows. Now, he has struggled a little bit lately, but still on coming off a win. So who knows what's going on there. Sometimes I wonder why they don't just make the Amazon Prime shows, just add more fights to those shows, add more prelims to them, put those on YouTube, and that way fighters like Agalan Thani, who maybe aren't going to be like fighting for a belt but are still on the one championship roster, have fought many times, can still have a spot on the big show. But yeah, so he's fought for a long time. He went pro in 2015, and 8 years later, still in one championship. Very loyal to the promotion. He's fought Yushin Okami, Yoshihiro Akiyama, Kadestam. You see that Ben Askren started off with a 6-fight winning streak. But yeah, look at this guy. Hardly ever goes to the judges. I think I saw maybe 2 or 3 decisions in there in his 18 fights. So guaranteed violence with that guy. He's going to be fighting Magomed Murad Pasayev, who's 26-year-old undefeated Russian guy. Mostly fought in Russia, FFP, Goretz, Berkut, Young Eagles, and then made his debut with one championship earlier this May. So yeah, this could be a really interesting, probably very violent fight. Hopefully we get a finish out of that. The other one, let's take a look at this other guy. Tapology has Chayan Orjak listed, excuse me, as a Russian. Says he was born in Mongolia, so not really sure how his official citizenship lines up there, but he also is 1-0 with the Friday Fight Series and has fought for ACA. He's fought for a couple other smaller promotions there, but yeah, he's fighting Andrei Chelbayev, who I believe has also fought in one championship with Friday Fights as well. So yeah, a lot of guys that 3 fighters fighting tomorrow that are all 1-0 in the Friday Fight Series. So my guess is with the Friday Fight Series, it's kind of almost like see it, not quite like a contender series, but see it as like the B level of the promotion. And if they look good and sort of outgrow that level of one championship, and they'll go on to the Friday Fight shows, or sorry, the Amazon Prime shows. So yeah, those 2 fights tomorrow morning. Moving on to Saturday, this will air in the morning if you're in the US, but this is AFC versus Heat 2. The next installment of a lot of these Korean promotions doing co-promotions. So yeah, looking forward to that. Black Combat and Deep have their second show on the schedule. AFC versus Heat. They had their first meetup earlier this year. I've got their fight card up here, so let's take a look at that together. I think it's a pretty solid card here. Some pretty good Korean prospects. All right, so there you see our fight card for AFC versus Heat. One guy that you can see right at the top there, there's 2 5-0 Korean guys, Yuju Sang and Song Kyung Jong. So they're both fighting, this guy fighting Tomohiko Hori, much more experienced Japanese guy, and then Yuju Sang fighting Takuya Kuramoto. I don't know. I feel like a lot of times these fight cards like AFC in the grand scheme of things is like probably like higher up the totem pole of Korean MMA than Heat is of the Japanese MMA totem pole. So in some ways, I feel like usually the Koreans kind of have an advantage. Deep, I think 2 Japanese guys ended up winning in the Deep Black Combat. I feel like that's a little bit more equal, but AFC has some pretty good fighters. They've also got this kid here, Cho Jun Gun, who I have been pretty high on ever since he made his pro debut. He's like 16 years old basically, and looks like an adult. Well, he looks like a kid, but he fights like an adult. And so I've always got my eye on him. I think we'll see really good things from him in the future. He had like a really awesome KO last year that on my channels went viral. So that's kind of how I remember him. But should be a pretty good card. I don't know a whole lot about a lot of these Japanese fighters, but the standout fighter for me is Yu Sang, probably close to like Contender Series, Road to UFC, or even UFC level. And fighting this guy, Takuya Kuramoto. Let's just take a look at him and his record real quick. 30-year-old featherweight. Lost against Seo Dong-hyun, who was a pretty good fighter at the last AFC Heat meeting. But before that, on a 4-fight win streak. So probably a pretty good test for Yoo Sung. I think Yu is probably going to take this one. But looking forward to watching that. I'm going to try and get up and watch this event. But yeah, AFC versus Heat goes down in Tokyo early on Saturday morning if you're in the Western Hemisphere, in prime time if you're in the East. So, all right, let me hit WLF and Octagon. Octagon is a show going down from Baku, Azerbaijan, capital of Azerbaijan. Octagon, as you may know, Kazakh promotion, but they have kind of been expanding a little bit more and more, bringing in fighters of different ethnicities and nationalities. And now they're traveling, I think, as far as they've ever traveled to Baku, Azerbaijan, putting on a card from Baku tomorrow. And I think there's somewhere like 8 or 9 Azeri fighters on the card. So that's pretty cool. I feel like Azerbaijan is a pretty undertapped region or underrepresented region on the global stage. And it seems like a culture that is really just like ripe for the MMA market. So cool that they're kind of tapping into that. In the main event, you've got 2 guys that have actually already fought before, fighting for the Octagon middleweight championship. And yeah, it's going to be Gunduz Nabiyev versus Islam Boltaev. Boltaev is an Uzbek guy who is just 3-2, but you wonder, why is a 3-2 guy fighting for a belt in Octagon? Well, it's because his most recent win was actually over Gunduz Nabiyev, who is Azeri. So they put these 2 guys in the main event for the interim championship. And I watched back through their first fight, which took place just a few events ago at Octagon 42. And it was Boltaev that just like absolutely wrecked Nabiyev over 3 rounds. A couple times Nabiyev was able to reverse and get a better position, but I think we're probably going to see Boltaev repeat, since these 2 fights are in such short proximity to each other. So a little bit of a strange decision to put a rematch of a guy, the Azeri guy got beat pretty badly, and now they're putting it in the main event and an immediate rematch. So I feel like it's probably going to be a win for the Uzbek Boltaev, but maybe the hometown crowd will have a little bit of a rub on Nabiyev. Otherwise, yeah, 9 Azeri fighters on the card. Not a whole lot else that I'm like, a lot of guys, less than 5 fights on that card. Some Kyrgyz guys, a few Kazakhs, but yeah, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, some Azeri guys. So yeah, I'll be checking that out. And then Saturday and Sunday, I'm a little bit confused on this. WLF been putting on pretty good shows once a month as of late, but this show, it says that there's going to be events on both Saturday and Sunday. And as far as I know, I haven't seen like an official fight card released for either of these days. They've been doing these themes where it's China versus another country, which I think is fun if you get the right fighters. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time. But I think this one will be their most competitive yet. They are facing off against Korea. So it's going to be 8 versus 8. So perhaps they'll do 8 one day, 8 the next day. But yeah, so they're doing China versus South Korea. And the main event is going to be Xiebin. Let me actually pull up my card here. I haven't put these on Tapology, or at least all of them just yet, just because I wasn't sure of the exact dates. But I've got these fights here on my screen. It's going to be Xiebin fighting a guy named Jung Hong-guk, who is a former AFC champion and a pretty solid fighter. Like this is not a mismatch, I don't think. Got Ren Yawei fighting Choi Sung-hyuk. Daniar Nurboli, Chinese guy, fighting Lee Isak, who's 3-0. Jo Kun fighting Wu Ji-wan. Ahabota Molatihan versus Lee Sung-jung. Ji Mu Ibu fighting Lee Hae-wan. De Ga Shui, who's a really good prospect out of Amboa fighting Kim Hyo-ryong, and Jung Si-jun fighting An Jae-young. So there's a couple of those Korean guys. They pulled a lot from Team Mad. I think there's a couple from Danger MMA as well. But yeah, some Team Mad guys on there. I think this will be honestly like a pretty good country versus country showdown, which they haven't always had those. Like Russia, they got a lot of just scrubs, absolute scrubs from Russia, and it was a total wash for Team China. Team Mongolia, I think they won 2 against China, but it was still like pretty heavily favored toward the Chinese side in the matchmaking. So I'm really excited for these events to go down this weekend. Xie Bin, I think if he wins this, especially like gets a stoppage, they could bring him into the UFC Shanghai event later this year. If that does end up happening, I'm still hearing they're hoping to do that. So everything, all the cards are lining up for them to return to Shanghai by the end of the year. If they do, I'd expect to see Xie Bin on that card if he were to win, especially to get a finish this weekend. So I think that's what's at stake with WLF. But yeah, let's go into, obviously we got the big one this weekend, UFC 292, Zhang Weili defending her strawweight championship against Amanda Lemos in the co-main event. Main event, Sean O'Malley fighting Aljamain Sterling for the UFC Bantamweight Championship. Lots of great videos about all these fights. I've put out 2 videos so far about Zhang Weili, one about her training methods, one about kind of a breakdown in some regards, a little bit of a preview, a little bit of a breakdown, just some thoughts that I had over the matchup with Amanda Lemos. And I know you all probably have some questions out there. I'm not just gonna like read the script from my second video, but I think that this could, basically what I'm expecting from this fight is round 1 and round 2. I think there could be some dicey moments for Zhang Weili. I think if she can like keep things close, especially push things into the clinch, maybe even bring things down to the mat, I think she should be okay and safe. But fighting at range where Amanda Lemos kind of goes into her Muay Thai zone, starts throwing some counter right hands. Like Zhang Weili, I think she needs to be a little bit more careful about the strikes that she throws. Maybe pull back on the volume just a little bit. Just try to keep things tight. Amanda Lemos, as I talked about in the video, really good right hook, especially the counter right hook. Zhang Weili, if she's throwing a lot of volume out there, she's just going to be giving tons of opportunities for Lemos to land that right hook. And honestly, like Lemos probably, like who really hits harder than Lemos in the strawweight division with the fists? I'm not really sure. I know Zhang Weili hits really hard too. She can knock people out. So she's definitely up there. But Lemos, especially like, you guys remember when she fought Marina Rodriguez and she was just kind of like pot-shotting a little bit. And then as soon as she had Rodriguez hurt, she clicked up like 7 years and just started slinging absolute haymakers one after the other. And Rodriguez was just like frozen, just taking punch after punch against the cage. So I think Zhang Weili, like if she stays in the clinch, if she works wrestling, I think that she shouldn't have any trouble getting Lemos to the ground. Staying in the clinch, she can throw elbows, knees, beat Lemos up, let her wear the weight. I don't think, like some people are wondering, is Lemos going to get tired? Her conditioning, she hasn't gone 5 rounds in the UFC, and that is true. But I watched through and like a lot of her fights in the UFC have gone to finishes, so it's hard to tell. But the Angela Hill fight, which was a grueling fight, she was not huffing and puffing by the end of that fight at all. And that was an exhausting fight. But Lemos does not, it's not that she is a low volume fighter, but she just doesn't throw in a lot. She doesn't often throw in a lot of combinations. So I think she knows herself and she knows how to manage her own gas tank. but I still would not be surprised if Zhang Weili put a lot of pressure on her, especially in the clinch or in grappling, if she's able to wear her out a little bit. So that's kind of what I expect from the fight. I think that Zhang Weili, I mean, she has good coaches. She watches tape. She has coaches that do that for her. So I think that they're going to be aware of Lemos's game. If I can figure it out, then I think they can too. So I'm sure all the observations I've made, they've made as well, and many, many more. So they know an attack strategy for Lemos. They know stay away from the right hand. If I were her, I would just honestly play it as safe as possible. Press her against the cage, bring the fight to the ground, throw some elbows, just try and smash her. So, yeah, I think that's the game plan to beat Lemos this weekend. Okay, I'm sure you all will ask a lot of follow-up questions about Zhang Weili. You don't have to. You can ask about anything, but that's why I'm not going to just like ramble and rant about that. Let's get into your questions and let the fun begin. Gene, it is Weili Fight Week. Oddly enough, I'm seeing a lot of support for her during the press conference. So I've seen online a lot of people saying that she was paper champion. Have you seen this hate? Yeah, I have, and because I read the comments on the YouTube videos I've been posting over the last week, and I do see that. I did make a post on my Instagram, MMA Ecosystem, and kind of actually answering that exact question. So I kind of made it, my argument was that Zhang Weili has beaten one of the best grapplers in the division in Carla Esparza. She's beaten one of the best strikers in the division twice in Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and she's beaten one of the most physical fighters who's both a good striker and grappler in Jessica Andrade. So beating that trifecta, I think it's hard for folks to argue that she is a paper champion. And then even with Rose Namajunas, between two fights, think about how much of a gap she closed. Yes, she lost the fight by split decision the second time, but think of the gap in between their first and second fight, which there really was not a whole lot of time between those two fights. Maybe, I don't know, what was it like? That was like spring 21 to, I don't know. Was that November of the same year? It might have been less than a year. So yeah, think about the gap that she was able to close with Rose. Really impressive. So yeah. But yeah, I didn't watch that press conference. I literally clicked on that press conference that must have just ended now. I clicked on it for about 11 seconds to hop into the Ian Gary Neil Magny interaction. I'm just like, nope, I can't handle this. So I did not see how Weili was received. Some of you all had asked, like, think she's going to be cheered? I think so. I think a place like Boston, this isn't the South, like, I think that she'll probably have a good reception. New York, she had a good reception. Not that that's any skin off my back. Whether or not she's well received, I'm interested in the fight. So, but yeah, she's always going to get that kind of hate, you know. Do you think I could do more videos about different fighters' training styles? Really enjoyed the Zhang Weili one and didn't know she went to so many places to train. Normally I see fighters stay at one gym. Right. First of all, really appreciate that. Really appreciate you watching that. That very kind feedback. I would like to do that. That was really fun. I think I went through every single Instagram post on Zhang Weili's account, and I made like a timeline of everything on there. Then I like almost did the same thing with a couple of like her key coaches to kind of see like, okay, they were present for this fight, they weren't present for that fight. I didn't go super deep into that in the video just because I don't know how interesting that would be to too many people, and it would just it could feel really tedious to a lot of people. So I didn't expand on that timeline a lot, but I did really enjoy doing that, and I wouldn't mind doing that, especially kind of like thinking about other Chinese fighters, especially who are tied to one gym, but then also travel around. Song Yadong is like, he technically is still like an Umbo fight representative, but he's been at Team Alpha Male. So I think that could be something interesting to explore, and kind of how it fits into like the wider development of one country's MMA development. So I think that, yeah, I think that's a good idea, and wouldn't mind kind of checking out how a lot of Chinese fighters generally schedule and manage the training between being at home and then being abroad training at other places, for sure. Do you think that Weili's team looked at that jab and right hook vulnerability you mentioned in your breakdown, or is it something non-fixable despite her 3-fight run of great game plans? It's definitely fixable. It's definitely fixable. The knock on Zhang Weili has been sometimes that she's a little bit too hittable, and that is totally something that you can fix. Having a weak chin is not really something that you can fix. If you have a weak chin, you go down really easily. You really just have to work on your defenses. You have to work on keeping your hands tighter, managing your distance better, protecting, building more walls around your chin, basically. But Weili, at this point, doesn't necessarily have a weak chin. She's only lost 3 times and only been finished once. She has taken a lot of damage in some of her fights. I'm mainly thinking about the first Joanna fight. Really, that might actually be the only fight where she took a lot of damage, aside from the first Rose fight. But yeah, I think it is totally fixable. I think she just needs to be a little bit tighter with her strikes. In the video I mentioned, like, if you're throwing in such a high volume that you are just like, your hands are constantly moving out front of your face, you're giving just more and more opportunities for your opponent to counter you, especially if you're throwing a lot and your hands are just kind of naturally coming down as you do that, which is easier and easier to do if you're throwing a lot of combinations. So the fix for that is to keep things tighter, manage your distance better, be more selective about your shots. You think about Justin Gaethje, right? Justin Gaethje had that reputation of being an extremely high volume action fighter, where he got a lot of knockouts, but he also took a lot of damage in his fights. And his adjustments, which I wouldn't say I'm like smart enough to be able to pinpoint every one of those adjustments, but other people have. But his adjustments have basically allowed him to still score a lot of knockouts, but not take as much damage as he used to. So I think there's blueprints like that, and it's totally something that is fixable, for sure. If you aren't picking Zhang Weili, you're either a bigot or know nothing about MMA. Agree. A lot of people that are really, the thing is that I feel like, honestly, I feel like Zhang Weili had a much higher chance of winning against someone like Carla Esparza than she did Amanda Lemos. With someone like Lemos, she has knockout power. The combination of having a track record of being somewhat hittable against someone that has really, really heavy hands, I can see why someone would try, especially if you're betting, would try to like cash in on an Amanda Lemos knockout. I can see why you would do that, but it's like Amanda Lemos has, like, I would say two, maybe just one, like really, really strong arguments to win the fight, whereas Weili has like 4 or 5 different ways that she can win this fight. Honestly, if the fight gets to the ground, I don't feel like Lemos really has anything for Weili. So if it's there, it's all Weili. If it's in the clinch, it's all Weili. On the feet, Weili can even still hurt her on the feet. She just has to be careful, as that's really the only place where I see Lemos being a threat. But I think people picking Lemos are probably just banking on that like really big knockout shot, or they know her, they're friends with her. They're in her fan club. So yeah. In the live stream, Weili said that she has a separate team that points points out to her bad habits as well as the exploitable habits of your opponent. Do most fighters have that resource? Most fighters that are at an elite level that have really one-on-one coaching do have that resource through their head coaches. Most fighters, I wouldn't say have like a separate team that would address those issues, but I think most fighters would just get that kind of feedback from their main coaches. But yeah, very smart. How do we get Migu? I want to watch this card, but without the annoying commentary in a language I don't know. Well, Migu, it's just an app on your phone, and I have it on my phone. I'm in the US. However, if I try and watch a live UFC event, it's going to geo-block me. So I'm guessing if you're outside of China, you're going to get geo-blocked. Most, like pretty much all live UFC content through Migu is only accessible in China. So otherwise, yeah, just look on your app store and try to download it. Some people, I'm not recommending this, but some people have downloaded VPNs. VPNs exist. Just going to float that out there and leave that up to you to do with that knowledge what you will. But yeah, let's see. Question about if Lemos has stagnated as a fighter and won't get better. I don't know. I think you're right that as I watched back her past 5 fights, and I didn't see like she seemed like she was mostly the same 5 fights ago she was today. And so I haven't seen a whole lot of development. You're right, she does train at a pretty small gym. In the first video I posted, I pointed out that for some people, having a small gym where they get a lot of attention from their coaches may feel like a better fit for them. But I wonder if Amanda Lemos could be suited if she were to just like step out, even to like an American top team for a hot second, maybe reach out to Amanda Nunes, see if she can train at her gym. But yeah, or train with Nova União, Andre Pederneiras, hop over there. I wonder if like, yeah, you've been at the same gym your whole life, small gym, if you may stagnate a little bit. But yeah, I guess we'll see. If Amanda Lemos is able to offer up more than just a jab and right hook, which she definitely has. I mean, she has a Muay Thai background. She knows how to throw proper knee, proper elbow, kicks. She actually has really strong leg kicks. I didn't necessarily mention them in my video because I was focusing more on like the jab and the right hook are what I really saw have the most effect on opponents. But she does have really strong leg kicks. So I'm guessing she's probably going to use those against Weili as well. Asking about if Rose and Joanna are better technical strikers than Lemos, and Weili did a better job countering the jab than most Rose and Joanna opponents. Yeah, that is true. I do think Joanna and Rose, especially Rose, are probably better technical strikers than Lemos. I would pick Rose against Joanna. Obviously, she beat Joanna. I would pick Rose against Amanda Lemos for sure. But yeah, Lemos has a pretty as orthodox as fighters will get of a Muay Thai style for MMA. Single strikes, kind of Muay Thai stance. Yeah. But yeah, I think Rose is a better striker. Saying that she gassed in the Angela fight. She did, but I felt like she got a little bit tired. You saw her breathing out of her mouth, but I felt like she was able to manage herself and prevent herself from like basically falling off a cliff in terms of gas. But yeah, and that was a really, really like high-paced fight, fast-paced fight. So I don't totally falter with that. Like that fight went everywhere, but it does give a little bit of concern fighting another high intensity fighter like Zhang Weili for 5 rounds. We'll see. We'll see if her conditioning will hold up. Why reporters asking Weili about Suarez and Yan Xiaonan fighting Lemos, and she said that's the only thing she's focused on. Yeah, I mean, people just, I think that's pretty normal for media to ask about other contenders in the division, especially fighters that are like potentially next, just to ask their thoughts. I don't know if it's going to be Suarez or Yan next. I would say if Zhang wins, you're going to see probably Yan versus Zhang at the end of the year, if they can swing that in Shanghai. If not, I wouldn't be surprised if they give Tatiana Suarez one more fight either way before fighting for a belt. Just since she's fresh in the division, I mean, I think she could challenge whoever the champ is today, and potentially be successful. She's a great fighter, but yeah, I think it's natural to ask about that. Why do you think Weili's game planning was so mediocre at the beginning of her UFC career? Probably just like continuing to add other minds to the pot, you know, being able to pull from other people. I mean, she I think has expanded her team of like you all have pointed out, folks that help her to game plan, point out weaknesses, study tape. She's added to that. She's been able to travel a little bit more. I think it wasn't until the second Rose fight that she had even trained anywhere other than Black Tiger in Beijing for a sustained period of time. So I think that's why, just kind of staying in the same pocket. And then once we saw her add other people to her training plan, then I think that's when she started to close those gaps for sure. The separate team, Weili said, is not a part of her coaching staff. She said it's a bunch of breakdown videos with arrow drawings and done through email and sent to her and her coaches. So yeah, So yeah, basically just like a bunch of MMA nerds who just stare at the screen and like break things down. For sure, not a lot of people have that. It might just be like something where for her and her head coaches to like spend their time in the gym with her, working with her face to face, and then basically just paying a bunch of like MMA nerds to spend 2 hours in one day just nitpicking over the smallest things. So I bet that I would venture to guess that there are other elite fighters that have that. They definitely have like the money to do that, but they probably just, you know, those people are in their bedroom on their laptops rather than walking into the Octagon with elite fighters. So that's probably why you don't hear as much, but I would assume that is probably pretty common. Weili quoting Bruce Lee. I mean, a lot of Chinese fighters quote Bruce Lee, if I'm not mistaken. She'll fight like water. Does that mean she'll take the path of least resistance, like wrestle and grapple? I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. I hear a lot of Chinese fighters talking about Bruce Lee, looking up to Bruce Lee, getting into the sport because of him. So I wouldn't read too much into that. Although if I was a betting person, I would put money on Weili taking the fight to the canvas for sure. She said in an interview that she doesn't care about being the best, but focusing on studying her individual opponents. It is weird that she doesn't care about being the best. Well, if you think about like, if you are able to beat, I think if I were to interpret what she was saying, she's saying like, and I'm kind of elaborating on what she's saying, but it makes sense to me to say, I'm just focused on each opponent one at a time and pulling off a perfect performance against those opponents. And then the best will just happen. If I'm able to like systematically dismantle every opponent thrown my way, then being the best will just happen. That's not something I can control, because being the best is how you're compared amongst your peers and even compared to who's come before you. So that's not like other people's performances are not always something you can control, how you're perceived among others. I think it's more of like I would rather just like surround myself with the thought of just like, how can I be as perfect in this single fight as I can? Thinking like a George St. Pierre, who literally was like, so I think when I think of George St. Pierre, I think of someone who is so obsessed with the game and did not want to literally allow himself to make a single mistake. And he really like got to that point where every fight was like a wash. I mean, I know eventually he ran into Johnny Hendricks, and I think that over time that mentality created a little bit of a feeling of burnout, which could have led to those like that performance against Johnny Hendricks. But yeah, I think it's more of a striving for individual perfection rather than how I'm perceived among others, I think would be how I would interpret that. My argument stems that maybe Weili was getting hit by jabs and right hands, comes from fighting really good fighters with true. I mean, yeah, if you're fighting Joanna Jacek, you're fighting Rose, a good chance you're gonna get hit. Very good fighters, especially Rose, extremely well good at using the jab. So not necessarily a knock on that. I mean, Carla cracked Joanna with one time, yet never talk about that. Right. So are there plans to go to China at the end of the year? So far, yes. There is nothing signed, set in stone yet, but that is the hope. I would think that, like, I mean, we know UFC is going to, like, it's been announced, 2 of their November shows have announced locations, New York and Las Vegas, or maybe actually even more than that. Sao Paulo, New York, and Las Vegas, that's right. So probably like in the next couple weeks, you could see that announced, especially like Road to UFC is next week. So you'll probably start to hear things pretty soon after that, if they're going to have the finals in China. So yeah, I'm probably going to start asking about that pretty soon and see what I can hear on that. Thinking about a translation error. About not caring about being the best. I don't know. I mean, I could see, honestly, I do actually think that Zhang Weili doesn't super concern herself with being the best or how she's perceived. What do I think about O'Malley being uber promoted on Embedded? Because he's like the biggest, honestly, like the biggest draw out of the whole card. So it makes sense. O'Malley is really, really good on camera, right? Not only like how he conducts himself, but he's a colorful personality, both literally and figuratively, with the hair. So yeah, it totally makes sense why they would do that. He is an interesting character. I feel like he has a lot of haters, but I also feel like he is extremely popular as well, especially like the younger UFC crowd, for sure. I feel like he taps into that pretty well. So no surprise to me that the UFC is really honestly building this event around him, even though Aljamain Sterling is the champ in the main event. But yeah, how come the Migu logo only shows up on the UFC canvas when Weili fights? I see all the fights on Migu. Probably because they know like they're gonna have a much bigger Chinese audience when Weili fights, I would think. Do you watch Embedded? You know, I used to watch every single episode religiously. Now I'm a little bit more hit and miss. I need to catch up on this week's Embedded, but sometimes I really enjoy them. Sometimes they start to feel a little bit formulaic. Fighters flying in, showing up at their hotel, going through UFC check-ins. Sometimes feels a little bit formulaic to me, but I need to catch up on this week just because it is a little bit of a bigger one. So yeah, for a long time I watched every single embedded. Some of the best like UFC content out there. Unscripted stuff, definitely a lot of fun. Just saw part of the presser. They were going crazy for Weili. Yeah, nice. AFC went to Vietnam. Which country do you expect they'll go to next? Well, they probably went to Vietnam because they have some kind of partnership there, and they're going to Japan on Saturday. So that's something. Vietnam was an interesting one for me because at that point when they first went, I was like, are there any MMA fights? Are there any MMA fighters in Vietnam? Because I didn't really know of any. A couple that have competed for one championship here and there, but like, yeah, that was interesting for me if they went to Vietnam. And I think their first show, like, they didn't have any Vietnamese fighters fighting. Interesting that you bring up Vietnam, because I know this isn't your question, but I've spent a lot of time this week putting in results for some Vietnamese events into Tapology. And I feel like Vietnam, and I saw it with Nepal earlier this year, that like there's finally starting to be some movement, some like in-house MMA development that looks really promising. Lion Championship has held 8 events in Vietnam so far, and a few of those fighters are starting to like not looking half bad. Not sure if they're ready to like fight internationally yet, but a couple candidates, couldn't name them off the top of my head, but a couple candidates that if AFC comes back to Vietnam, would love to see them on some of those shows fighting some Korean fighters. So yeah, really good production. Check them out on Facebook, Lion Championship. You can watch all their events on Facebook. Maybe they're on YouTube as well, but Vietnam is a country I'm going to start watching with a little bit more intrigue. Not sure when Lion Championship 9 will be. They just had Lion Championship 8 a couple days ago this week in Hanoi. But yeah, I think they had a title fight and a lot of fights. They have like 11 amateur fights and 7 or 8 pro fights on the card. So Vietnam finally starting to see some traction. So otherwise, if they're going somewhere else in Southeast Asia, I would love to see Malaysia or Philippines. Those are 2 Asian countries that I'm like, feels like y'all are a little bit stuck and you could use some love in terms of just like having some like really like good, high quality professional events in the country, kind of just like stimulate something to try and bring out the best, give some fighters from this country platforms. Philippines is farther along than Malaysia, but like it kind of feels like, now there are a couple guys that I've seen on some URCC shows, and in one championship they've got Stephen Lohman on there who's really good. They've got Sangyao's kid on there as well. So a couple good Filipino fighters, but we just love to see a little bit more. Philippines just has seemed like such like an ardent fight community, and with like boxing being as big as it has been there, I really would love to see a day when Filipino MMA is just thriving. So it'd be cool if AFC went there. Other than that, Malaysia, yeah, I would love to see a little bit more love there as well. Do I think Zhang Weili has transcended racism? No, because I saw the YouTube comments on the videos this last week. Which, did I expect haters to show up? Yeah, I did, because haters show up even in these chats. Like I haven't seen so far today. I haven't seen any of those comments, but I made sure that I blocked a couple people. So yeah, it's always going to be there for sure. And I could, if you and I were sitting, if you were in the room with me right now, we're sitting on the couch, we could talk for an hour and a half why I think that racism will never go away, no matter like Zhang Weili has never like overtly made any political statements. She, I feel like, has like never missed in terms of like her PR presence, and seems like one of the most likable fighters. Like, I don't know what she has done to generate racism. And please hear me out here. I'm not like, I want to get into these Zhang Weili questions this week because it's fight week. It's a good time to do that. Normally I kind of like to cover a handful of different topics, simply because like ultimately I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to come off as like, this is the Zhang Weili show where we just talk about her and only her. This week making a little bit of an exception, but like, but yeah, she's always going to get that, totally. And I think that that's something she just has to live with. So, and I think that she's worked on that. Is this week more about Weili and not about Lemos? Seems like Lemos is mad about that. She shouldn't be, since that's what people are saying about Rose when Weili fought her twice. Lemos has fought how many main events? She's fought Andrade and Rodriguez in 2 like Apex main events. She just hasn't had like her moment. Like, yes, you're in a pay-per-view co-main event, but like, look back, you have not had this like breakout moment that has made you into the superstar. I think you have to earn that. And if you go out there, you knock out Zhang Weili in the first round, or you have a 5-round knock him out, drag him out war that really earns you the respect of fans, then I think that respect is owed to you on like a wider all of MMA level. So I think it's incumbent on her to show why she deserves that respect, and perhaps that'll bring out the best performance of her. And you know, I'm not anti Amanda Lemos. I don't have anything bad to say about her, but if you're like, if your biggest moments come on UFC Apex shows, and you know, you're thrust into this title fight, it's on you to show why you should be a bigger draw. So let's see it. Let's see what you got. Yeah, it's on you. Do you have some different fighters with different training styles in mind if you're going to create more vids about training systems? I would like to cover, that's like a rabbit hole for me that I think would require me to know more about MMA training. I think you could go into, like I mentioned, some of the Chinese fighters like Song Yadong, Yan Xiaonan. But if you're even branching out farther than that, I would love to do also just like profiles on gyms. Especially, I'm thinking some of these like Indonesian gyms, I think would be really, really interesting. Dream scenario, I get to go to Bali MMA or Soma Fight or UFC PI Shanghai. Tiger Muay Thai, maybe a little bit too big, too big of a gym to really be able to like cover this in one video. But I would love to do like a profile on there, kind of get to, that'd be like a series, do profiles on some of the coaches, get an overview of their fighter base, where their fighters come from, and some of their like philosophies as a gym. I think that could be really fun. I could see those videos performing really, really well. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of that kind of content on the web right now that are really, yeah. Who is this gym? Who are their coaches? Who are their key fighters? Who are some of their guys coming up? What are some of their key philosophies as a gym? I think that would be really interesting. I don't feel like I could do that justice unless I traveled to those places and got some mat time with some of those folks. So that would be a dream scenario. I'd have to think about who I'd want to do because I think I would like to like branch out of just the Chinese fighters. But that's for me like the most immediate, like within arm's reach for me, that is accessible for me is like the Chinese. So I'll probably put out, if I did more of that, maybe like one more video on that over maybe a more like well-known UFC fighter to see how they've handled that. Li Jingliang would probably be an interesting guy too, since he's a little bit older, has traveled around even a little bit more than the other guys. So yeah, good questions. I think a lot of fighters from Tiger Muay Thai or Bong Tao, lots of Russian fighters go there to train wrestling and striking. Yeah, it's true. Weili said in the live chat also that Team Lakai's former Sanda coach is now her coach. I hadn't heard that. So I'll have to look into that. I do know that John Yodpech took a job at Pineapple MMA in Singapore, but I thought that he was still giving Weili some time. So that's why I hadn't looked into that, but I'll have to look into that. Do you think that part of racism for Zhang comes from what other fighters say about her? If your example, Rose saying the thing about red stuff, right? People projected stuff that Weili never said exactly. Yeah, I do think that what Rose said triggered a lot of the backlash and a lot of the racism. I mean, it was like at the event, people were chanting what Rose said, better have been dead. And you see that comment all over the place. UFC posts a picture of Zhang Weili on their Instagram. You look through the 100 comments and you'll see that comment parroted by people. So it absolutely had an effect. And that's why I feel like Rose was kind of like, and don't get me wrong, aside from this comment, I really like Rose Namajunas. I think there's a lot to like about her. I really like her style. She's an amazing fighter. And so I'm definitely not an anti-Rose person at all. But I do think that comment is worth revisiting just because of, and I get it, like Rose is not responsible for how other people repeat what she said, but you have to understand the fan base. Like in general, especially in the US, the fan base is a pretty like conservative, right-leaning, pretty like, which can oftentimes also have a lot of anti-China, strong anti-communist messaging, beliefs. I'm not like getting into that of like where I fall into all of that. I'm just kind of observing, like, you have to realize that if you say something like that, it's going to be a powder keg and people are going to love that. It's going to blow up and they're going to repeat it and it's going to be weaponized against your opponent. You have to realize the effect that that's going to have. And it seems like that has fueled a lot. It's like, and what that comment did was that it associated, it linked together the athlete with the political system where they come from. And it made the assumption that because this fighter is from this country, they wholeheartedly support everything their government does. And they are basically like a token of their government, which is absolutely like, that's one of the biggest errors that I see and like assumptions that I see people making of Chinese fighters, is that every Chinese fighter absolutely agrees with everything their government does, loves everything about their government. Even if they say that, like, even if they express support, like who among us perfectly unilaterally supports everything our government does? Even if you consider yourself patriotic, like, I think that like people made that connection, and so they made Zhang Weili this like token of the Chinese Communist Party and communism. And maybe she is, maybe she does, and if she does, like that's her decision. That's up to her. That doesn't make her a bad person. I mean, all of us are raised in a culture and an environment, and a lot of us are raised to be patriotic of our country. And I'm trying, as I talk about this, I'm trying to approach this delicately and really answer the question of like, did Rose's comment fuel racism? When there's a figure, a public figure that you really look up to, their opinions about political things suddenly like have a lot more value. I mean, why do you think people care about who actors vote for? You know, why do people care who Leonardo DiCaprio votes for? If it's because he has a platform and he has a lot of influence, and people love Leo DiCaprio for his acting. And so if he voices support for a political candidate, he has a lot of influence. So when you have that platform, you have to be aware and cognizant of how people will latch onto things. Even if it's just like, for Rose, it's just like, hey, this is my family's story. My family in, is that Lithuania, were negatively impacted by communism. And I don't think anyone's debating that or pushing back on that. But she's like connecting it to Chinese communism. And yeah, I do think that those comments were really irresponsible, and I think for her it's worth revisiting. And I've lived in China. I made a ton of friends while I was there, of lots of ethnicities, and I had friends of every ethnicity of China, not just of the Muslim minorities, the Tibetan minorities, that had negative things to say about their government. I had other friends that were like super patriotic and would never say anything bad about the government. But I had just as many friends who like, well, yeah, and maybe they were not as like loud with their criticism, but like Chinese people think for themselves, and they don't just like, what they say publicly may be different from what they actually believe in their heart sometimes. And I think that like Zhang Weili gets made unfairly into this token of Chinese communism, the Chinese Communist Party, which again, if she like fully supports her government, that's up to her, and that's fine. If she does, she should not be penalized or punished for that at all. But she has stated that she tries to stay away from politics, and I think for her that's probably a wise choice. Even staying away from politics, she got drug into it and booed and just like had a lot of things to deal with, even staying completely out of it. So for her, it makes no sense to get into politics. I think she's playing a smart game there, but yeah, maybe that was more than you all asked for that question, but I will, like, in the future, if I get asked about that, I probably won't go into as much detail on that, but yeah. The Sean O'Malley of being north of Cali. That's me. Would love more profiles in gyms. Always great to learn about new fighters and where their styles come from. Would you attend classes at that gym and learn from coaches, or just interview? I would totally like take classes. I think that would be the best way for me to be able to understand a system, is if I were to take classes. Don't expect me to like be able to like, I don't even know if I'd be able to train with pros. I've trained with pros before. I mean, I've grappled and sparred with active UFC fighters and future UFC fighters. Like I have that in me to do, but I'd have to get in shape for that. I really think that's unfair that opposing fighters can say non-true things so people can just protect false stuff to them. Yeah. James, yeah, pro Zhang Weili for life. Do you think it's smart for Rose to? Yeah, I got into that. Appreciate that. Yeah. And yeah, great that I spent time in China to see where your passion comes from. It's just so different when not everyone can do this, but like reading about a country or reading about politics in a politically leaning publication is radically different than actually spending time on the ground somewhere. And that goes for, I mean, all of us do that. Like we all make assumptions about places, but just like, yeah, really value that time to be able to spend overseas. It's a lot different. Like I got to have long conversations with Uyghur friends. I had a couple Tibetan friends, had some friends from some other minorities, but just getting to hear what their experience was like. And I wasn't necessarily there to like throw fuel on the fire, but yeah, just getting to hear from different perspectives and getting to really, yeah, I was a student at a university, so I got to spend a lot of time with the same people and really value that. But yeah, appreciate that positive feedback, guys. But yeah, so that's it for me today, and really enjoyed that. I know that was some like weightier stuff that I got into, but I'm trying not to be just like the Zhang Weili fan club, but it's as a media member, I'm trying to be like fair, but also like bring in some of my own experience and opinion. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't know how convincing that is to folks that are really set in their mind, and that's okay. But yeah, hopefully that was positive. But yeah, appreciate it. We just got like 48 hours or so before we get to see Zhang Weili compete. Got a lot of other great Asian fights this weekend. Hoping to cover as much of them as I can. I think actually my wife will be out backpacking this weekend, so I'm probably just going to be glued to my screen watching MMA fights. So I'm looking forward to that. So stay tuned to MMA Ecosystem on Twitter, on Threads, occasionally putting stuff out on there, YouTube. Next week, I will have a UFC Singapore something. I'm trying to figure out what kind of angle and what kind of story I want to tell with UFC Singapore. But like I said, since we don't get a lot of Asian MMA events post 2020, I really want to get into this event. Hopefully do it justice. I know like I can only do so much as one guy. And I would love to do like multiple things. I'd like to do some deep dives on it, but yeah, I'll put out as much as I can. Of course, we got Road to UFC semifinals next weekend. I will probably not do as much pre-fight coverage for Road to UFC. I will hopefully do like a Road to UFC reaction video the week after it happens. So that'll be more when I talk about Road to UFC, and then with the finals, I'll try to do as much as I can. Dream for me, and I thought about doing this before the opening round, but it may make more sense for me to do it before the final round. But I would love to interview as many of the finalists as I can and get those up on my YouTube channel and just like cover the crap out of the finals, out of UFC Shanghai if it becomes a thing. But yeah, be on the lookout, MMA Ecosystem. Hopefully, I've got a couple things in the works. Got a scoop that is pretty big. But yeah, I'll see if I can figure out anything about UFC China. Don't know if that is a thing yet, but yeah, and I appreciate those comments, Kendris and James. Trying to be open-minded. It doesn't mean that I'm going to like entertain racism on the channel, but I think having an open-minded approach to where if people are willing to actually have a conversation, if people just want to like rant and burn people, that's not a conversation, and I'm not open to that. But if people actually want to learn, then hopefully I can help this channel be a safe place. And I'm working on this being like safer for everybody. I know safe space is kind of like a buzzword in our culture, at least in the US, but I do want to be sensitive of others, and I want this to be like a safe place where people can ask questions without fear of being torched. So yeah, appreciate your support, guys. Appreciate your positive comments. Until next time, we will probably be digesting Zhang Weili's win or a potential upset, but there I showed my cards a little bit. I'm picking her. I'll be honest. I'm picking Zhang Weili to win this. But yeah, I'm sure most of you are too. Appreciate your support, and we'll talk to you next time. Enjoy the fights.